Stories, and today we're going to be talking about what we've learned about combat.
Yes, so far in our D&D journeys.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
And we're going to approach this from both the player and DM point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to toss it to you for the first, and then we're just going to kind of have a conversation about it.
So I don't know if I think I might have come up with the topic.
Yep, this was yours.
So this is an area where I think there's probably the most misunderstanding. If you're a competitive person, you like board games, you like sports or whatever, and you jump into D&D, I think this is where misconceptions come, because the idea is I've got to play this as smart as humanly possible and be as strategic and use every way that I can to, quote, win.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taken me a while to learn that's really not part of the game, and you can actually be better at the game if it's possible to be better at the game by losing combat.
Yes.
From time to time. So I think that's probably the really biggest thing I've got as far as from the player side, but there's a lot of things that go with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I will say that for my first big talking point is what I've learned is that role play and embedded in that, your stats should really govern your decisions, not necessarily looking for a winning strategy.
Okay.
And so that's, I think, it's easy to overlook, particularly in combat. You disregard intelligence, wisdom, charisma, but you really shouldn't. I mean, that should be part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So as I thought through that, my favorite character that I've created so far to play is Cal the fighter, who has a very high intelligence but a barely average wisdom.
Okay.
And in a way that's been very freeing, because so in a way, the advice I'm giving, play your stats, it's really easy with that one, because he's able to strategize, intelligent enough to look for the best ways to fight, but the low wisdom means that he will not really stop to think about his own safety. He'll jump right into the thick of combat, particularly if he has to save somebody.
Right.
And so that's how I've played him, is just have to hold him loosely. If he dies, he dies, because he's not one that's going to have second thoughts about his own protection. It's all about protecting the people around him and jumping in and taking risks.
Cool. I like that. And it's I don't know. I'm with you. I don't know that I consider very much those stats when combat starts.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a lot of sense. I think the first time I've really ever thought about that is playing our chaotic group.
Yes.
And how, they are complete idiots. At least my player is. For once, I'm playing a character that has a lower intelligence than me personally, the player. And it's easy to, I don't want to say it's easy, but I make decisions that are really bad. I'm thinking that I'm making a good decision. Yeah, that's kind of cool. And so I'm going to build off of that by going to one of mine, and that is kind of really fits in with this well, is I put down that combat is more than hit points and armor class in my eyes. Now, go back 40 years when I was playing first edition, that's all combat was, is hitting, slashing, trying to get the monster down before they got you down. That's all it really was, and then getting their loot and moving on to the next. What I mean when I say combat should be more than hit points and armor classes, I feel like from both the player and the DM, it should continue to tell a story. Even though it's combat. It's not necessarily role play, but you can still tell the story through combat. Mm-hmm. So while combat is driven by numbers, those numbers can still be used to tell the story. And I always like it when I think either you or Chris introduced me to the how does it happen? That idea when you have the last hit on someone or something, and you as the player get to decide, what that looks like. And that's part of the storytelling is now me, the player, I can add to the discourse and describe how my character has the heroic final blow, at least on one creature, regardless of what's going on around him or her. And so I think a lot of times when I watch the kids play and we're doing a battle, the role play goes out the window, and it's them figuring out what happens, and it's really just the rolls and how much damage, are they dead yet, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And combat is still storytelling.
Yeah, and I would say it's still, for me, although I'm aware of that is a very hard challenge. I struggle to remember to translate those roles.
Yep.
And I feel like, to be perfectly blunt, most of the groups I play in, it's the same way. Mm-hmm. If I remember and I try to do that, I don't always find an audience that picks up and will role play back and say, oh, I reel back with the blow, and I, and so I don't quite know how to get over that, because everybody's different. If they're perfectly happy with just focusing on the roles, then that's fine.
Right. But I think that's, if I've learned something about D&D as I've aged, is try to make it part of the story as well, and not just the story of the battle, but the battle is the story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so actually most of the other stuff that I have to talk about is from the DM standpoint. And I think that makes sense. I've DM'd more than I've played now. So I've had more time to think about that. So, and a lot of this I know that I've referenced in other episodes that we've done here of Teachers in the Dungeon, but I think I'll just go ahead and throw out, because it's worth saying, don't be afraid of PC deaths.
I thought about that one.
And again, this is a physician heal thyself moment, because I still pull my punches. Yeah. And most of the time. Mm-hmm. I've got a couple listeners that I'm sure right now are thinking, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
But I think what I would say, what as I thought about that, I need to keep track of the reasons for the danger that the characters find themselves in. I need to be aware, did they make a bad decision where there were clear signs and they went ahead anyway?
Right.
Are they in this because there were several bad dice rolls? Or did I mess up as a DM and put them up against something? Did I put them up against something they couldn't handle without making them aware of that fact?
Right. Or giving them an out.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I need to be, in the heat of the battle, I need to be aware of that. Oh, okay, this character did roll, a 7, a 4, a 2 on their saves, and this is what the dice have decreed.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think in our staff group, even though it's changed a lot, I think I'm the first one to do that as a DM. Is that correct? I don't think you killed anybody. It was the first one was Arios. Yes,
I could have, but we kind of decided to retcon because I had an NPC in that could have helped, and I wasn't thinking straight, and I thought, no, she would help you. Mm-hmm. Let's rewind. Yeah.
And when it out, we've, like you said, we've talked about these in other places, but when it happened, and we were playing online, so I could have very easily not rolled the double damage on one of the dagger blows, but I on the spot made the decision that he made a heroic move, but he also knew that this guy, he knew what he was getting himself into, but he felt like and to Corey's credit, Corey's the player of Arios, to Corey's credit, he was having a great battle. 2 or 3 rounds in, he started playing really well, and he was making the right moves, and he was rolling decently, and so his confidence was up, and I can see how Arios would have confidence being up, and he chased the and this, when you say, you put the characters into a position which they really, Dagger Dawn was over. And so I was trying to let him get away.
Yes.
And Corey Arios chased him down.
And I remember as a player thinking, oh, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
And so later when you were expressing, oh, I don't know if I feel bad. And I thought, no, it was clear in your shoes, I would have felt the same.
Mm-hmm.
From a player perspective, it was absolutely clear that that's what, if that's what the dice said, don't fudge it.
Right. The shock was all there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was cool because Corey played it right, I think. I think he played it right. But then he's like, you know what? I got to own it. That's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he took it really well and created a really cool new character that I also killed later. It was really cool, and that this leads to one that I had put down, and we've alluded to it, and that is, as the DM, don't roll on the table if you might need to nerf a roll.
Right.
I think there's a balance to. I think there's excitement to rolling on the table, coming over the DM screen and putting the rolls out in front.
Yeah.
But I think you got to really be careful about that, because if you don't want someone to die, or you don't want something awful to happen to somebody, don't do that roll in public.
Mm-hmm.
Save it for tense moments that are exciting, but not death-defying. And there's others where I'm just like, I'm going to keep this back behind the screen, because I think the anticipation of like a big fistful of six-siders dropping is better at the table than bring it over the screen and it's where everybody can see it. Now they're looking at you as you're counting it up, and you're like, trying to poker face or not, and just letting it all go. I think that's fun. But, I think there's a mixture of secret versus public roles for the DM, and it's just something you learn over time of when to do it and when not to do it. But in those like I said, those death-defying, the character's pretty bloodied, do it behind the screen.
Yep. Unless
it's
clearly as a result of their choices, and you want them to see.
Yeah, I mean, it could be they know this could be life or death, and they're like, they're climbing a cliff and trying to grab the monster's leg to pull him off, and blah. Mm-hmm. You could fall too. And so that's a case where you might be like, all right, you realize the situation, right? Okay, I'm bringing it out in front.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. So another thing, I don't know if it's related or not, but I guess they all are, since it's all combat. And that is to work on variety in combat.
Ooh, okay.
Rather than just, okay, roll initiative, you're all in front of each other, who do you hit first? Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. And I feel like I am learning to do that as I go forward. I think of some instances. And again, it's nothing that I came up with on my own. It's more that I've seen other people do and incorporated it. So the combat where Brian was just mentioning it, that you were being chased across an open plain by gnolls.
Right.
Did not allow you to rest.
Yep.
Because I realized, we kind of gotten stale that you guys would always just blow all the spell slots and say, okay, let's take a rest.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, this time let's
teach them.
Yeah, and make it, and at the same time, following my earlier rule, I think it was clear to you folks early on that's what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. So you knew you had to decide whether when to shoot your shot, so to speak.
Right.
And in addition, I thought it'd be interesting, make combat a little more interesting if you had innocent travelers amongst yourselves that you had to protect.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
So that becomes part
and you
of
even gave us they really need to get this many people across or something like that, if I remember right.
Yeah, and I was thinking that Warriors of Kryn used that.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So that's an interesting thing. Another way of variety is to make the terrain more part of the combat.
Okay.
And I'm doing that now in the online group that I'm running. Mm-hmm. in that they're investigating a abandoned mine. So there's a couple
Right.
spots where combat's going to break out where they're on a slope and lots of gravel. So every time they try to so the way I'm trying to balance this to make it fair is the creatures that they're going to be fighting are probably not they're definitely not overpowered, but so in a regular fight they wouldn't necessarily even break a sweat, but add a dex save throw every time.
That's cool.
And that suddenly increases the difficulty and makes it harder for them to use their abilities to their best.
Nice. That is cool. And I remember playing in a game with guys I didn't really know, but I don't remember exactly how it happened, but they invited me to the game. And so I was doing I think it was a bi-weekly game, and we were on a mountainside. And there were some kind of giant. I don't remember which type of giant. I want to say it was frost giants. But he put that almost that same dynamic in where if you are in this part of the map, you've got to be very careful. And so I took that. I was a druid, and I took that and used it to my advantage, because I said, "What's the terrain like?" And he says, "It's rock, but there's dirt and other debris on top that is what's making you slide." And so there's a giant standing there. I came down and I made my movement. I slid. I rolled dex to be able to stop. I put my hand down on the ground and I cast Rock to Mud. And everyone at the table was like, their jaws dropped. And I said, "I can do that, right?" And I said, "You know what I'm doing?" And they're all like, "Yeah." And the DM's like, I'll roll dex, see what happens. And he goes, and he did, and it was before disadvantage and all that, but he did something to modify it to where the giant slid right off the edge of the mountain. It was great. It was great. So I took his challenge and I used it to my advantage. But that is super cool. I love that it's a normally, not easy, but it's a normally capable battle, but you're going to make it difficult by that. When you said variety, this is what came to my mind. I was thinking more literal at the table and the mechanics of combat. And we've toyed with this from time to time, where after the end of each round, you reroll initiative and see. And I've sometimes I forget to do it, and I don't know that it's necessary to do all the time, but I certainly think there's some battles that you could really shake things up at the table if you put some kind of variety like that in it. And then, of course, you're really good at in the middle of battle, reinforcements come for the other people, and adding that kind of variety where we think we're going to wrap things up.
Now, I've had reinforcements come for you, too.
You have. When it was just Marcus and I in Slint, we were fighting a hag and all sorts of things, and yeah, you did come to the rescue there. But I wanted to go back to your Knoll story and talk about the benefits of that, because as a player, once it sank into my head that these guys are using spells like crazy and we have to get way over there and we're being chased. This could not, once I realized that the Knolls were not, I said you, but I mean that the Knolls were not going to let up. And it's seemingly once we defeat this wave, we go a little further and there's another wave. That was really exciting as a player. Kept us on our toes, made us really kind of stretch our thinking as to how do we conserve resources, but also deal with this real danger. And like you said, the real difficulty was keeping the people alive.
Yeah.
And what was even worse is then we ended a session right in the middle of that chase. And we spent a whole month strategizing. Well, what if we let the people go to the tower and send someone with them and the rest of us stay back? What if one person stays back and we just buff them really big? And we went through all of that. And then, of course, I missed that session and I don't even remember what happened because I wasn't there. So, but that is cool. And I'm with you. The variety of using variety in combat is golden. It's great. Takes a little creativity on your part as the DM.
And I guess I would say, just as one more thing. It just occurred to me that I've learned about combat.
Yeah.
To piggyback onto that is the impression. The impression of the battle from the behind the DM screen can be very, very different than the players.
Yeah.
Because I know we've mentioned that I was worried that the chase combat would just become a slog for you guys.
Right.
So it was gratifying to hear you guys say, no, that was part of the excitement.
Really was. Yeah, it really was. And so something I want to use to build off of that is as the DM, this is going to be contrary when I get to my player one, but as the DM, don't rush that combat for yourself. Be prepared for the combat, as any DM should be, but be willing to be flexible and change your strategy based on what the characters do. And that kind of goes into the adding variety. You know, maybe the players do something, you're like, whoa, wasn't expecting like me dropping the giant off the side of the mountain. Now what do you do? And so I fall into this trap all the time where me as the DM, I feel rushed, and I'm like, okay, I got to do something so that they don't think I'm they don't think that I'm like you. They surprise me. And so, but I think so I do something dumb, or I just keep the monsters trying to do that strategy that isn't working. And so I think as a DM, it's okay to just hang on a second. I gotta figure out what's going on here and come up with a new strategy. Don't rush it.
Yeah.
That's something I definitely have learned, but I'm not great at practicing.
And we didn't talk ahead of time about how many things we have. So this is my last sort of big one.
Okay, yeah.
So if you've got a lot more after that, that is fine. And again, I'm not quite sure how to tie all this together, but I guess I would say what I've learned as a DM is that it's related to the variety, and that is combat doesn't have to, I don't even know how to put it, doesn't have to end in death or surrender. And this is something that I struggle to remember in the heat of the moment, but a lot of creatures are going to have a self-preservation instinct.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the nice things about understanding a little bit about the type of character. You know, if you've got a fiend or something like that, particularly low level or low intelligence, they probably will just
Fight to the death. Yep.
Or a creature has its backup. But otherwise, they're going to try to escape. And sometimes that can be a relief, and sometimes that can be a frustration to the party. But I think it goes into the bigger picture of variety. And one thing I have not yet tried, and that is, well, I guess I have a bit, but that can include surrender too. Oh yeah. Particularly if you've got a creature of somewhat high intelligence that can communicate, it may give up. A surrender or a parlay. Yeah. To say, whoa. Okay, now didn't work out the way I thought, but yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good point. And again, it's a trap that we fall in as DMs, especially if you're my age and you come from first, second edition, where it was battle to the death no matter what. Video games where you just fight till the power bar goes all the way down. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think in reality, things do want to live. Yeah. You might be in a fight with it, but it wants to live as much as you do. And so prior to that final blow, might call it, or, what do they call it? Tapping out. Yeah. And saying, okay. What do you want? No, and that gives a chance for role play and for characters to decide, for players to decide, are we dastardly enough that we just end it anyway? Or, yeah. And kind of last couple things connected to that, although that is true as a DM, I think it's also a good idea to have your finger on the pulse of the players themselves. And if you've got adversaries that have run away again and again and again, give your players a win every once in a while. Yeah. Let them finish off something, Right. And that's the nice thing about D&D is you've got, just mindless things like a ochre jelly or something like that just of course you're gonna there's no moral qualms about destroying that thing. And ooze. Yeah, right. How do you do experience points for a battle where, let's say, the creature does the experience differ if they run
or if they surrender? Or do you give full experience on a battle like that of defeat? How do you do that?
Well, I've got players that are going to be listening, and I don't know how much I want to share, but
Okay.
I think it's okay. I fudge XP all over the place.
Okay.
I would say consistently in favor of the players.
Okay.
So as far as that particular instance, I do not give full XP.
Okay.
I will just sort of in my mind, if the creature flees with a quarter of its health left, then they get 3/4
Okay.
of the
that
XP.
makes sense.
But by the end of a session, I'm also averaging in how much XP for role play and smart decisions and that sort of thing. So I think it all kind of balances out in the end.
Okay. I like you said that if it runs away with a quarter, that you do XP that way. I hadn't thought about that. But I think if it were a surrender, I might consider full XP on that, because technically you probably, if they're surrendering, you probably were about to
You've neutralized
defeat it
anyway.
and then just speaking with and parlaying with the creature who's surrendering is that character experience too. So yeah, okay. I was just curious if you do just, hey, you fought it, whether it ran or not, you give the full experience or not.
And the last thing about this whole big
Yeah.
area is to flip that as well, and to allow players to avoid a fight or win using non-combat methods.
Sure.
And that's where the railroading comes in. I mean, I'm kind of stubborn. And if early on particularly, my thought was in a combat, if they try to get away, no, you have to fight. You have to fight. And I'm learning to embrace their creativity.
Got it.
And if the players come up with a way to fool or somehow,
Sneak or-
disarm this enemy without a fight, let's see what you come up with and see if you succeed.
Absolutely. 100%. Sometimes as the DM, I'm relieved when they avoid the fight.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of work.
Yes.
So the last couple that I had as I was putting this list together is more at the table rather than the story. I really like that you had a lot of story items, and some of these might help with that role play, or one of these, and it's this one, is physically at the table. I think one thing I've learned is we used to play way back in the day. We didn't have figures or mats or anything like that. And so it was all theater of the mind, describing things, or you might get a piece of paper out and draw arrows and things like that. I think the tabletop is important these days. Yeah. And really being able to map out combat and show what's happening. Mm-hmm. So anything from just a grid with tokens or Monopoly players or something like that, that's a start. Mm-hmm. But minifigures make a difference. There's a certain attachment you get to the character if you've got a minifigure that goes with it.
Yeah.
But you, like I've said several times, you've brought a new level to it, to my combat game, and that is where you have the tabletop terrain. And I always think it's so cool. And sometimes it happens at Game Club. I don't use terrain, but I'll get kids that like stand up and they're like eyeballing to see, could I shoot right through there? Or nice. I know many times, and the one that I will never forget is it was in Slint. It was the trick that you played on us in the temple where we thought that we were safe in a temple after questioning the one guy who was the good guy and then coming to the other temple and didn't even question them. But you had that built with lights and everything. And I remember looking through the window and like, okay, could I do this? And I remember I had to stand up to look down into the room, and you really get a sense of crowdedness because we were all pushed into a corner. And I just thought it added a ton of story when you have access to things like that. Not necessary, but if you've got access to it, by all means, take advantage and use that stuff. But I definitely think these days, grid with tokens or something is kind of important to combat anymore. And the last thing I have is, this is a player item. And I think we talked about it when we did our like pet peeves or how to ruin your DM's day. So it's kind of a rehash of that. again, it goes back to the story. Do everything you can as a player to keep combat moving along.
Right.
If combat is coming around, especially if you've got a larger group, but even in smaller groups, pay attention to what's happening at the table. Look at and anticipate what's going on so that when the turn comes to you, you've got that spell ready, or you know what you're going to move here and you're going to attack and this is how you're going to do it. Granted, things happen right before it's your turn.
That's what I was going to say.
I totally get that.
I feel bad when I'm a player and it gets to my turn and I over-explain. I knew what I was going to do, guys. I really did. But now this has all changed, so give me a minute.
I mean, seriously, though, that I think everyone knows when that happens. Because usually, combat gets a flow going, but when something big happens and you're next, I think everyone has a little patience with you on that. But nothing's worse than the tension of combat, and then it gets to somebody. I'm going to just say it's usually a spellcaster.
They've got it hard.
I don't play spellcasters, and that's why.
I was going to say, as a fighter, you kind of know, just hit it twice. And
yep. But like everyone's anxious and excited, and like the spellcaster's coming up, and you know they've got some awesome spells, and it gets to them, and they're like, hang on a second, let me look this up real quick, and they're flipping through the DM's guide, and like the shoulders of everybody at the table are like slump, and the story stops.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's like, okay, I'm going to get up and go get something to eat. And it's like, oh, man. Whereas if you've got some of the scenarios in your head, granted, there's those moments where it's like, oh, this happened. Can you give me a second? That's understandable.
It's kind of one of those things. We need to do a deep dive. Maybe that's next year's schedule where we do a deep dive into, I don't even know how we do it, but what's bad about playing and go class by class, or what's what do you have to do right if you're going to play this class or something like that. That could be interesting.
I'm writing it down. You can probably hear it on the mic. Yeah. So I think just keep combat moving.
Yeah.
But it all comes back to, in my mind, the story. Yeah. It's for the sake of the story. And yeah, I think that's what I've learned about combat over the years.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Okay. No, I'd say we're both very philosophical at the moment. Just thinking.
Yeah, just thinking.
Combat.
Yeah. I've noticed that the goblins have completely fallen asleep. I hope our audience hasn't fallen. If you're driving, wake up.
Yeah, the skinny goblin's curled up in the bed, and the big fat goblin is on my desk.
Oh man, I just can't. I can't help but think about the story you told me about them last night, and how I just kind of want to go poke them and wake them up right now. Well, anyway. What have you learned about combat over the years playing Dungeons and Dragons? We'd love to hear the things that you've learned that either build on something that we have said. Maybe it's contrary. Maybe you have something where you're like, no, Tom, you're wrong. If someone needs to look up a spell, let them look up the spell. Hey, I'm open to listening to those types of arguments and situations. And hey, let's all learn from each other.
Yeah.
So reach out to us. If you've got a nice description that we can share on air, send us an email, teachersinthedungeon@gmail.com. If you just got a little note that you want to toss out there, maybe something you liked or something that you disagree with, get on Twitter or Facebook, comment there. On Twitter is @DungeonTeachers, and Facebook and Instagram are Teachers in the Dungeon. And don't forget, you can probably check this session out over on YouTube.
Yes.
And we'll have some images that go along with our stories that we tell. So check out our YouTube channel. Dan's doing a really nice job of really jazzing up the show visually because we don't. I've got a face for radio, and so that's why we don't really do those. Yes. So anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. And until next time, keep the combat moving and keep rolling those 20s. So long, folks.